20 years ago, the American press found itself in an earlier crisis of public trust. The trigger was the 1988 presidential election campaign between George Bush Sr. and Michael Dukakis.
My fellow Democrats, my fellow Americans, tonight, with a wind at our backs, with friends at our sides, and with courage in our hearts, the race to the finish line begins.
Michael Dukakis from Massachusetts.
Despite the initial razzmatazz, this campaign descended into such a dismal negativity that it shocked even veteran journalists, and the press reduced it to a horse race on turf chosen by the candidates' camps. At the same time, journalists began to notice the local press had become hollowed out, divorced from the communities it served, and losing money. One response was a movement called public journalism. It advocated reconnecting press and citizens. It demanded the press take responsibility for what it did to the quality of the public debate, and that it help solve problems, not make them seem insoluble. Making the public go well was one mantra. Professor Jay Rosen of New York University now writes a blog called PressThink. At the time, he was public journalism's guru, thinking through many of its ideas.
One of the most common and easy to grasp was the idea of developing a citizen's agenda for elections coverage, where instead of covering the campaign the way the professional reporters assess it, you make a conscious effort to go out among the community and find out what are the things that citizens really want this campaign to be about. What do they want the candidates to discuss? And actually try to synthesize a citizen's agenda, not only for your own coverage, but in what you want to ask the candidates and the kind of discussion you want to engage. So just that shift there was one way of doing public journalism.
And was there a general consensus that that kind of approach lifted the quality of the public discourse?
No. There was no consensus about anything. From the beginning, people began to denounce public journalism, resist it, or dismiss it. So it never became, I think, accepted that this was a better way to do it. And today, the press is actually back where it was, with no citizen's agenda to guide it and very much a horse race narrative to sustain it.
So how does the public journalism movement look now that we have the internet?
Well, it was an early warning. It tried to say to an overly professionalized press that you had drifted from your base. The disconnect between what you do and what ordinary citizens do and democratic politics was a problem. Because when the internet came along, people could start addressing the disconnect between what they wanted and what the press was themselves. And they didn't need enlightened journalists anymore to reach across the divide. And that is what restarted this whole conversation.
Now, of course, the internet enables us citizens to answer back, articulate our agendas, and partnerships between press and public become a real possibility also here in the UK. Kamal Ahmed again.
When we did our campaign called Irrepressible, which was about internet freedom, particularly in China, and we did things where we linked in with Amnesty, and we made it about not just saying, here's the problem, let's shout about it, but what can we do about it? And we got in touch with the UN. We became part of a UN conference in Greece about internet freedom. We worked with Google on some of the work they did, Yahoo, who had been heavily criticised for what happened in China. On our Irrepressible website, which we launched with Amnesty, we had 50,000 people joined into the debate. We had a live event and webcast with Amnesty in their headquarters in Shoreditch, which had loads of Americans involved. It was a year-long campaign. I think we're catching up still on this type of thing, but there has to be much more engagement with where the public is and offering solutions.
Could you have seen, as head of news, a state of affairs such that your newspaper became involved in campaigns which were not of that kind. So, for instance, in looking at problems within health or within education or problems within transport, and in the same kind of way convening the parties and trying to bring a solution about. Would that have been a proper role for your newspaper, do you think?
I think it would have been, but I think you have to be careful that journalists don't start sort of viewing themselves as policy makers. That's not our role. We don't obviously have any democratic mandate. Papers don't run countries, and I think newspapers that have a sort of attitude that they should be, are going to be careful about that. But of course they have an influence on the debate. So I think there is a balance to be struck, but I think that there can be much more, but it is for politicians and Parliament to decide, not for newspapers.
The public journalism movement doesn't want papers to run countries, but it does want the public to work with professional journalists in order to find solutions to issues which affect all of us as citizens. So it's not surprising that Jay Rosen in New York thinks that talk of balance is a bit too top-down, a bit too cautious.
It seems to me that this tribe of professional news producers, which, by the way, I admire and support, I educate people to join it, so I'm very much part of it, but from a distance. They, in order to go on, to have a tribe, have to migrate across the digital sea. And when you do that, when you have to pull up your roots and pull up your institutions and rebuild them on the other side, it's very important for you to ask yourself what's essential about these institutions, because in rebuilding them you may find that they're a lot lighter than you thought.
Is the public purpose of journalism, though, one of those components that is absolutely essential in that rebuilding?
Totally. And the reason why this is a moment of great excitement and opportunity in journalism is that the public can participate in that public purpose of the press. And that's what the public journalism movement was trying to recognize, but within an stable professional model of the press, which has since then come undone.